Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about drawing hands. Okay, and it's one of the more difficult things you'll probably ever draw is drawing hands. Part of it is because they're just really complex. They can do a lot. They can, your fingers can move in all different directions, and there's tons of different hand gestures that you'll end up encountering when you're trying to draw. And then the other part of it is because it's something that we see all the time. We see our own hands, we see other people's hands, they talk with their hands. So if something's off, we can tell pretty quickly. Okay, so it's one of those things that we see quite often. Okay, so what I always like to talk about is just trying to approach this as more of a three-dimensional form. Okay, so when you are drawing the hand, let's say, so what's going to end up happening is that, basically like from your fingers down, there's the carpus and metacarpus bones, and then there's the phalanges. So basically just think of it as like your fingers and your palm, okay? And it actually kind of comes down to about here. So what happens is that, this length is basically the same length as this, okay? So if you split it in half, your fingers are, half the length of your hand, and of course the palm is basically the other half. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is, let's say when you're, trying to sketch a hand, kind of something that's kind of pointed at us, it's going to be a little more rounded, the form. Okay, because even though you want to think of this as a bit geometric and three-dimensional, it's going to be a little bit more rounded. But again, you got to kind of think of it as having multiple sides. Okay, so again, an idea of like having a more geometric shape to start with, that's going to help you a lot more. Okay, and then when you're drawing the fingers, again, it's not a bad thing to think about those, depending on the hand gesture, but this will vary, but thinking of them as sort of like one form. You can think of it kind of like a mitten. Like if you got your hands inside of a mitten, something like that, okay. And so I know it looks like a simple form and doesn't exactly look like a hand, at least not yet. But so like, if their hand's kind of like this and a little bit bent, that's going to help you a lot. So here we'll sketch out another one. Okay, but again, you'll have your four knuckles and of course your thumb, and it does have knuckles to it. Okay, so again, it's not a bad idea. Let's say, let's just say even you have like one finger that's kind of pointed off to the side and you got these other three fingers. You can always kind of think of them in groups. So maybe these three are a little closer together, even if they're not like bunched. If I can get my hand to look right, even if they're not bunched together like that, they might be a little bit like that. If this one finger over here is in a different position, even if I've got something like that, or one finger is just a little bit different, it's okay if they're, really close together and they're kind of bunched together. It really is okay to sort of think of them as a little group. What it's trying to do is just trying to simplify this for yourself. Okay, and so then when I go to draw this other finger, I can kind of group that one, or not even group it, but put it by itself. Okay, and what you're going to notice on your fingers is that there's a little bit of a curve here. Again, obviously here's your knuckles, but there's another set of knuckles there, and then at the top. So you really have three sections. There's a knuckle, and then there's one, the knuckle, there's two, and then of course the third. Okay, and like I said, three knuckles, and then three sections of your fingers. And each time they shrink by about a third. So however long this one's going to be about a third shorter. However long this one is, it's going to be about a third shorter. Okay, so it's just kind of a general idea to keep in mind. Your middle finger tends to be the longest one for most people, but everybody's a little bit different. Sometimes the other fingers are about the same length. Sometimes, like on my hand here, my ring finger is a little bit taller than my pointing finger. Okay, so the proportions can vary, but generally, like your middle finger is the longest, and then a little bit shorter, and then your pinky, if you notice, your pinky aligns with that third knuckle on your ring finger. And again, there's sort of a curve to it, so if you think of, let's say here's the palm. Okay, we'll just put a little wedge for where the thumb is. There's a bit of a curve, and then again, where that first set of knuckles are, there's a bit of a curve, and then where the end of the fingers are, there's sort of in a curve. Once again, here I'll just kind of put little circles for the knuckles. Obviously, that's not exactly the shape that the knuckles are, but we'll just put that to show it. So again, what will end up happening is that your middle finger will have the tend to have the highest point, right? And then your pointing finger, and then your ring finger, then you'll be a little bit lower. Again, if you notice, like your pinky's going to be a little bit shorter, like right there. Okay, and so then just above that knuckle or right about it, depending on the person, that's going to be the third knuckle. Okay, so your pinky sort of has, it's just shorter, and so its proportions a little bit compressed. But again, then you'll have that right there, this the second joint, and then their knuckles there, and then your finger will be there. Okay, and so I'll just kind of sketch these in really quickly. And see, I already drew that one kind of too long. I'll shrink it back down. Okay, and so that's again how the knuckles go, and and again I was kind of sketching them out real loose, so I probably do this a little bit too tall, because it should actually be, maybe the palm of the hand's probably more that size. Okay, but you can see, like, if I measure that, and see, I'm not bad. I actually did pretty good. So I did have the right size, but that's how, again, your fingers are structured. And so, again, as you're drawing, it's okay to kind of bunch them together, at least when you're first kind of sketching it in, and then you can start separating things. The other thing I like to point out with hands is that, this knuckle down here on the bottom acts more like a ball joint. That's what I mean by that is it can move in different directions. It can move up and down, it can move side to side, it can move in a circle, so you can wag your finger. And basically, you can do that with any of them, okay? So it's obviously you're gonna have a little more skill at doing that with your pointing finger. These other ones are kind of tied together. It's harder to do that with just your ring finger and your pinky. But you can move them any direction. So this knuckle and this knuckle, they're a hinge joint, meaning that they only bend one way. You can't really bend them sideways unless you want to break your finger. Okay, so they'll straighten and then they'll just bend the other way. Okay, so sort of like your knee, but your knee actually has a bit more mobility than this. So when you're drawing the fingers, they got a hand like this. Well, if you want this finger pointing off to the side, it's going to happen from here. Okay, you're not going to be able to have this part pointing here and this sideways, because otherwise it's going to look weird. It's going to look like the finger's broken. Same thing as you start spreading your fingers out, see how the movement horizontally happens at the bottom, not at the top. Okay, and so of course, as you, if you're drawing a hand like this, and then, you spread the fingers out, you're dealing with perspective and foreshortening and all those things. So, because you're seeing it from a different angle, so obviously it's going to kind of bend, but remember, it's going to follow a certain geometric, or certain angles, geometry is going to follow certain angles that, fit the rules of what we're talking about. But from here, it's able to move in change the gesture a lot more. So that's something to think about, that, this is where you get more of the horizontal, vertical, more of the movement, and then here it just kind of follows a certain structure. Okay. And again, when you're constructing the palm, so, let's say I'm doing that, a little bit of, a little bit in perspective. And sometimes I think of it as kind of like, drawing a slice of sandwich bread. But again, by doing this, like say our light's kind of beaming down from this angle, then like this whole half of the palm would be more in shadow. And again, if I'm, just thinking of the fingers kind of as like one form, we'll kind of split up the knuckles like that. Again, same thing. I want to think of the fingers as being more three-dimensional. Okay, and so again, when you add the thumb, actually, let's see, I'll start drawing it from here. Again, see, like right there, that's going to be more in shadow. This part should be more in shadow. Okay, so when you start with something like that, it's going to feel a lot more three-dimensional. Okay, because again, whatever, even if the hand's kind of coming at you with some real foreshortening, where it's aimed straight at you, and you got the fingers really coming at you. Again, still thinking of it as three-dimensional. Like there's three-dimensional form there, and we'll put the thumb on the same side. You're still going to be able to draw that, much better. And so when you're drawing the fingers, keep that in mind too, that you are drawing a three-dimensional form. You don't want to draw it too round, because if you look at your fingers, they're sort of flat. And then when you look at them from the side, you can see a little more, again, they're a little more squarish or boxy than you realize. Okay, and even how I'm holding my hand here, you can see, this side's getting more light and this side's not, because this is the, sort of the top and this is the side now. Okay, and so especially when you're having to deal with adding in shadows and dealing with value, keeping this in mind is something that's going to really help you. And so again, I'm just going to draw some fingers here as I'll draw just one in sort of a really generic shape. Okay, so remember, like that's the ball joint, this is going to be a hinge joint. So if I have it bending, I can do that. Again, because I'm just going to change the angle there, but I got to remember, again, it's not going to go sideways, it's just going to bend, bend down. Again, see there we go. I'm going to add a side to it so that it feels more three-dimensional. Okay, I'll round this one out a little more because it'll look more like the tip of a finger. There we go, and so I'll kind of harden up the edges so you can just see it a little clearer. When you're drawing a finger, and that's going to look a lot better than what we sometimes refer to as like sausage fingers, where you do something like this, and that just looks kind of weird. It doesn't follow the structure. Your hands, you got a little more tissue on the bottom because the palm, you grip things, and then that's more where you're where you tend to have more of your muscles, because we tend to grip this way, not this way. But you will have more bone on the top, right? But either way, there's a lot of bone in there. Your hands need to be a little more rigid, and so the bones are, they're not going to really change shape. They're not like muscle tissue or fat or skin. So again, that kind of boxy approach is what's going to make it look more realistic. Okay, so also what happens, and you can think of this a couple of different ways, like you think of your knuckles as sort of being these little spheres. So you can still kind of approach it more boxy, but what will end up happening is that, and it's something you can kind of see on your own hand, that where your knuckle is, it kind of bulges out a little further, and then just the way the bone is shaped. Okay, so it's a little further and it kind of goes in, it kind of curves in, and then pops back out when it gets to the other knuckle. So you're going to notice those things like that. And so as you're drawing this, you kind of keep that in mind. That could be something else you can add, or another element you can add to help make the fingers feel a little less like a robot hand. As you're going, that's what you'll do. And I kind of drew this one a little crooked, and it's not as good. And that's what happens. And so, another way that's kind of shown is, we'll kind of copy it over here. If you think of this almost like a little thimble or like a little cylinder that's in there, where the knuckle is, okay. I did the angle weird there. Let's change that. It could be more like this, because I'm trying to show it bending. And so you'll kind of, if you think of the structure of doing something more like that, where it's kind of curving. You know, so it almost looks like a little spool of thread or something. Again, kind of curving that in, and this will probably pop out a little more because you'll get that tissue building up there. And so obviously as you're drawing a human hand, you're not going to draw it to look that robotic. Okay, but you can kind of take that idea so see if I sketch this in kind of light. Okay, and so then as I'm starting to draw this in, you know, as I'm starting to shade, I can add those little curves and angles back in. And as I'm adding little details, yeah, I can, of course, start making it look a little more organic. Okay. The other thing I suggest too is that obviously, you know, the nice thing about drawing hands, even though they're difficult to draw, is that you always have a hand model because you have your own hands. So if you're right-handed, you know, you'll end up drawing your left hand a lot. But you can also take photos and just use your cell phone or something and take some photos. You can practice drawing hands that way. The other thing too is to look at other people's drawings of hands, like the really good drawings, and try to copy and see what, you know, if you can copy their drawings, especially the ones that are more of a sketch, because you'll actually sort of see the process. Because let's say I take, you know, like even this drawing and I finish it up a little more, let's say, what's going to end up happening is that, you know, if I don't completely finish this into like a polished, soft drawing, that you'll probably see some of the things I was doing. You'll see some of my little under marks here where I was doing the curves, and, you know, so if you practice drawing some of those sketches of hands that, again, aren't like a completely fully finished drawing that somebody spent like 30 hours on, what'll end up happening is that you can kind of see what they did, and that'll help you learn too, because you're just trying to copy the same process. Okay, but drawing hands, again, it takes a little bit of practice, and but once you start understanding how it works and how to think of it more three-dimensional, they get to be a lot easier.